So as I talked about on YouTube, it's really important to understand that the information, of course, that I'm putting out is from my research, my understanding, from what I have, discovered in my years of research and what I feel like is happening and what this is about. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time to, listen to my research, to even pay for it, and to be, invested and engaged in what I have, discovered and what we have discovered basically over the years. So it's a lot of information, and I have so many videos out, and there's so much to talk about that you can't spend a lifetime and get into everything. It's just not possible. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and really paying attention and supporting. But we have to look. We got to treat everything like a crime scene, like a huge investigation, because that's basically what it is. It's a huge investigation into our past and our purpose, basically. So when we go and look in the past, as I talked about before, see so many ancient civilizations, ancient people talking about beings coming from the sky. There's no ancient civilization you can find that is not talking about this, that has any type of real civilization. So all of them were obsessed with beings coming from the sky. They was obsessed with astrology and the stars and the planets. Many planets they shouldn't even have known about. They was obsessed with it. Their culture was revolved around spirituality. Everything was about preparing for those beings and preparing for the afterlife. And when we see, these civilizations and these cultures, that was it. You had the normal stuff you would need to sustain life. But when we start looking at these people dailies, like when we look at Islam, we see people work and the way they work and what they're working for contributes to the religion. It contributes to the religion, and they don't really allow you to do anything that's outside of the religion. So the whole society is based upon the religion, and what you do has to reflect that. So this was just no religion back then. It was just nobody preaching and nobody trying to indoctrinate. It was life. It was as if they knew. So that's the thing we got to look at and understand, what was the difference between them and us? The main difference is these people acted as if they knew. We look across the world, we see all these different ancient civilizations worshiping the same things by different names, different looks, but it's the same stuff. It's pertaining to the sun, it's pertaining to the body, pertaining to beings from the sky. It's the same stuff. We see structures and temples, monuments dedicated to spirituality. So you got to think about it. We got these civilizations. Everything is basically good. Everything is structured. The people know what they're doing. They're going about their daily lives. It wasn't so much as if they was trying to figure something out or even progress as a people as far as we do today as a civilization, trying to grow, trying to expand and build. It was just, this was it. And it was this way because they knew, because they understood that something put them there. It was something coming down. It was some beings from above. They understood spirituality. They understood death. They understood everything. And that's how they operated. And it's like they knew the point of them being there. And when you think about, what I talked about before, expanding consciousness, and that being here, as I talked about in Soul Purpose, will be for the benefit of experiences so that you can expand consciousness. You understand? You can't experience something you never experienced before, if you get it. So it's like the more we grow, the more we experience. So if you look at the separation from back then, we call it primitive. There was living primitive, brick, mud huts, so on and so forth. Today we live brick as well, but we have, stucco, we have, siding and laminates and all kinds of beautiful homes and completely different luxurious way of life. Totally separate. It's a new experience. Society's new experience. I mean, look at, hip hop, our culture. Everything is entirely new experience. So you got to think, do you believe that the culture we have today couldn't have been achieved, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago? What new information could have came, as I alluded to this before, what could have came to change our society? And I'm not trying to confuse you and say it as if some beings came and gave us new information. Everything was always here. It was known, but the energy was different. You understand? We wasn't trying to grow. Everything was about death, the afterlife, moving forward, growing spiritually. We wasn't trying to grow physically and experience new things on the physical level. Everything was spiritual. Think about this. So as a Christian, if Jesus came, right, let's say you're a practicing Christian, you're trying to figure this thing out. Jesus comes down and he tells you and a couple other people, and he tells you everything is legit. The Bible is legit. Everything in there is right. Make sure you follow the laws and commandments and live your life the way God wants you to. What do you do after that? What do you do? So those three people would live by that Bible. They would live by it because they seen Jesus and they know he exists. They understand their purpose and point, and they would live the way the Bible wants them to live. And they would go out and preach and teach or what have you. But if you do that, you forfeit the experience of the rest of the world. You forfeit the experience that so many different people get to have because they're not religious or even religious people. You have to look at the world and so many things that's here. And if our purpose was to, as I said, just worship this God, what would be the point of all this stuff being here? And why would it be even, capable of being made if that's our point and purpose is to serve and worship? There's so many fun things, so many feelings of joy, so many emotions you wouldn't get to experience just being focused on this one singular spiritual thing and dedicating your life every day to getting up in the morning and serving this book, this God, for what? Living this life that you're not even supposed to be in the city. So you wouldn't even be living in the city around people. You would be living somewhere outside of the city, away from sin. And you would be just trying to build the civilizations, as I said before, basically like the Mormons or basically like the Amish, I should say. So, we have a similar type of situation with the monks. The monks live monasteries away from the people. They only come down into the villages to talk and teach or to, ask for food. And that's when they come down. They don't really interact too much in, the rest of the world. So, that's why it's a big deal. If you ever been in an airport and you've seen monks, it's because they start coming into a different understanding of material, which they're not supposed to be, dabbing on. So I remember when I was in Thailand and I was speaking with the monks, that was something that they was talking about trying to understand the nature of material and our spiritual purpose with it, because you have to look at the amazing stuff we have in there. There's a spiritualness to it, and it's why are we able to experience this? What was it created for? Why is this here? And there's so many things that make sense that you can't just ignore because of spirituality. So even when we go back and look at the ancient civilizations of people, like they had to ask themselves the same question, if it was the same as us. So you look at us and we say, well, we're superstitious. We're following a religion. We haven't been proven that it's true. We just think and we're acting on what we've been taught. So go back then and think about those civilizations of people. No religion. Why would they be dedicating their life to this spirituality unless they knew, unless they seen? There's no point for you to spend your entire life looking up at the sky and looking up, at the stars for what? Unless you knew something came from there. You have to see something. So it's not even, to me, a debate that something was coming here. We're going to get into this in this video, but couldn't be their purpose. And they had to understand that. And that's why we see what we see in the ancient world, and why I've traveled the world and been to some of these places to see how these people lived and why they just abandoned it to go live, this new way of life away from spirituality when so much of the ancient world is consumed by it. it doesn't really fit or make sense. And you got to ask yourself, why? What was the point of that? Why did they change? Why did they, go away from spirituality? Why did they switch up? What was the big thing that happened? So this gets into the question that so many people ask: if God is not real, who do we worship? Who do we worship? Who are we supposed to pray to? And you have to think about that. And you got to look at how complex we are and that we have free will. If you creating a complex people and giving them free will to do what? To just simply worship you, it don't make sense. And you can't make rules upon that because it would defeat the purpose of being an all-powerful creator and being able to create. And if you create something like us for simply worship, why not program us with just that? We wake up in the morning, we eat, we shit, we praise, we go to sleep. And, that's the cycle. Why not program us to do just that? Why give us free will to go about, move about, and figure out, and think, and dwell, on things, on life? That would be something that's completely against your main agenda, which would be for us to simply worship and beg or what have you. Doesn't make sense. It's like building a machine that you build a car wash. And the purpose of the car wash is to wash cars. That's its purpose, to make dirty cars clean. Why would you then throw in a program to that car wash to make cars dirty? It don't make sense. It defeats the purpose of the car wash. The point of the car wash is to clean. Why would you even program it or make it even capable of making cars dirty? It doesn't make sense. So we have to look at this and look at, as I said, how complex we are and understand that it's not, we were put here to just simply worship. It's not that we was put here with a purpose even, because we're not eternal in the flesh. That would be stupid to make something that is going to completely be gone soon to sit here for a limited amount of time to do what? For the flesh or for material that's not eternal. So you have civilizations living, worshiping, looking up at the stars and planets or what have you. And, we're going to leave it right here and come back to this because the agenda kind of, connects the dots. So, we have the white man emerges, right? He emerges and basically begins to come in and blend in and mix in with different civilizations. And we see that everything changes after the conquest of Kemet. That's a big deal to note. It's a big thing. Don't think about Sumeria. This is why Kemet, it seems like everything starts with Kemet and why it's so important to them and why we see the pyramid on a dollar bill and we look at Freemasonry and everything like that. Everything is about them and us, but they are us. So Kemet falls. The world changes after that. Everything changes. And I have to reiterate that this was planned, but it's deeper as we'll get into. Kemet falls, right? So remember, everybody was coming into Kemet. Chinese talk about coming into Kemet. India talk about coming into Kemet. Africans, Europeans, everybody came into Kemet to learn. It was a learning center. So you conquer Kemet, you shut it down. What do? You cut off spirituality and you cut off learning. Plain and simple. That is cut off now. The people have what they have. Whatever they got, that's what they got. So that's now taken over and controlled. The world begins to change. They go out and start conquering, mixing in with different civilizations, marrying themselves and conquering themselves onto thrones and making deals and treaties with people. We know, as I said, the Chinese, they went over there and they made a deal with the Chinese. They started mixing in with the Chinese and mixing in with Asians. They went into India, the Aryans we're talking about, conquered in the Indus Valley and into India, started mixing in with those people, gave us the Persians and the Arabs. So we have this, white man emerged out of nowhere, conquest going on. And we know they was there for a long time, but it was at this specific point that everything changed. The Persians come in, as I said, let in the back door by the Greeks, and then everything changes. They leave the old world behind. All those ancient ruins we find, they leave them behind. And we talked about with the Taino people that go in there and they create the, Dominicans and Hispanics or what have you. And it's this huge conquest. We have a lot of peoples wiped out. And we have a lot of people that we know that was there for a long time and in certain places wiped out and, mixed in with the Europeans to create who we see there today. So originally we know we was there until conquest. So it's this huge campaign of conquest, world domination, beginning with the ancient Egyptians, and then everything just spreads out. And we see this conquest over hundreds, thousands of years, complete dominance by one people, these Europeans, these white folks. And we know once they establish religion, I'm going to go back and forth, as you'll see. I'm not going to go in order for a reason. So I'm going to jump ahead and jump back, but it'll make sense. But we see, as I talk about, this domination, and we see the established religion take place. Now, again, let's go back and look what happened. You have, when Kemet fell, spirituality is gone. It's completely different. And the learning center, which was Kemet, gone. The ancient civilizations, the ruins where people was living, they got ran from out of there. So over time, that spirituality was lost, and it was just like stories being passed down. And there's a reason, like it's going to make sense. So what did they do? Religion was created. One of the reasons they basically used it to get rid of all old spirituality. So once Christianity came into play, remember, they outlawed everything. And if you was doing alchemy, which was something you would want to know, which anything that was considered real power was outlawed. It was considered witchcraft or, demonology. That's why he did the book. So you had alchemy being outlawed. If you were a philosopher, this was philosophy, even though we would consider you being conscious today. But philosophy, being a philosopher back then, was like being a witch. It was like being a sorcerer. If you was a philosopher, you had to be on one side and be known to be, to that one side. A philosophy and just advice only, not in alchemy or real spirituality or astrology or what have you. What happened to the people who tried to step up and be real, philosophers and alchemists? They were killed. They were burned at the stake. So many prominent people were killed. They were smart, genius people that knew so much information, killed because of religion. So we have, remember, with the witch's hammer, we had the witches, the whole Salem witch trials. They killed, murdered those people. Anything. The reason why the King James Version mentions fairies, and you have to understand, we talk about England, and we know who was over there in Ireland with the Twa, the pygmies, the small people that they tried to say was these, goblins. They made up all kinds of stories, like they did with the Tasmanian people, and the Tasmanian devil, saying these people were evil people. And you got to understand why this stuff was done. And they used religion to try to justify all this, just like they did with slavery. But religion came so they can go about and say, you're doing this, you got to die. You got to stop, or you got to die. So anything that was attached to spirituality, that can be attached to spirituality, that can be used in any type of way to show any true, real spirituality, was done away with the Bible, with Christianity. So think about it. What did they do? Columbus and all of them set out to the Americas, to the Taino people, all the indigenous people, including in Africa. What did they try to do? They came in there and they brought Christianity. See, we think, and rightfully so, we think, they just came up with this stupid Christianity thing and they wanted to come in and push it on the people. But it's a completely different, it's a deeper meaning to it. We have to understand now that even then they understood universal law. They knew because they had religion. See, you can't look at the religion as I just gave you the last video, sole purpose. And those Bible verses, you can't look at it and say, and by the way, if you didn't see sole purpose, you need to be seeing that before you see this. You can't look at it and say, the Bible bullshit, or they were just trying to spread a bullshit religion. No, it was the truth. What's in that Bible is true, not on the surface, but the hidden meaning is the truth. And they gave it to the people. They was giving it to the people, but it was taking them away from real, straight up spirituality and giving them allegorical stories, parables, if you understand. So they told these people like it was real, but the deeper meaning is, we know, allegorical stories, parables. So look at what they did. They went into all these villages. We know they went into the Taino people. If you didn't convert, you was killed. Christianity, all that to get away with old spirituality, old religions. Now, a lot of the Africans that was left alone, the tribes, they were left alone to practice voodoo and to do what they was doing because they was in no way trying to grow as a civilization. They wasn't trying to grow and expand. Remember, you got to remember, you have the ancient Egyptians when Kemet fell, and there was no direction for those people when they fled into Lower Africa. They knew what they knew, but they began to build different spiritual civilizations. And it was basically, turning back into Kemet, how Kemet was before it fell. And that's why they was enslaved, as I talk about. So we see this huge urgency to get rid of all ancient spirituality. Remember what the popes was doing and what those rulers was doing. It was making these edicts, passing these laws to basically shut down all the old temples. Remember, we talked about this with Kemet. Shut down all the temples. All those old worship places and temples were shut down. And it was almost like it was a systematic thing, because we see it across the world. They just abandoned all the temples. The temples was abandoned. The people just moved into different areas and left these structures there to be basically found, centuries later. So one of the things we got to look at, I talked about this before, dragons. So when I talk about magical things, when I talk about the old spiritual things done away with, dragons was one of them. I know people are going to say, well, you're crazy. If you don't believe, if you haven't seen my videos, if you've seen my videos when I talk about dragons, you're convinced they exist. We already know we have fossils. And as I spoke to you about before, we know that dinosaurs were once called dragons. Okay, that's what they called. Dinosaurs were called dragons before they was called dinosaurs. So that can fix any confusion right there. So we have so much information on dragons. It's so many. I mean, just look at these depictions. So many depictions of these people fighting dragons, killing dragons. It was like a thing where you slay dragons. So we have so many ancient, depictions of dragons as if they was real. And there's no cartoons back then. There wasn't making up these crazy stories about these beings, these beasts. They had to have exist for these people to be able to draw them and talk about them. And for so many stories to be made up. Why would they, during these medieval times, because I believe they was around during medieval times, why would they be making all this stuff? And everything fits and coincides with their conquests. They're coming into England, they're coming into European lands, which is, our lands, and they're conquering. And then there is this understanding or edict or what have you that went out that basically said we have to wipe all these dragons out. And then when we go and look, as Maria Gamboutis talk about, this connection supposedly that Black women had with these dragons. It's a big deal. But you have so many people talking about dragons, and we're talking about during these times, prominent people. Maria here says hundreds of years later, the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus also mentions winged armies of snakes. Think about that appear from the lands of Arabia. Professor Mayer said, and the Roman historian Cassius Dio mentions that one day when Regulus, a Roman consul, was fighting against Carthage, which Carthage was black, a dragon suddenly crept up and settled behind the wall of the Roman army. The Romans killed it by order of Regulus, excoriated it, and sent the hide to the Roman Senate. And it says here it just wasn't Roman historians that wrote about encounters with dragons. We're not going to even mention the Bible, but the Bible has it. And you got to think about how long ago it was written, which the 1600s, King James Version, that would be medieval times. So they had to know to write about it. So many historians mention dragons and types of dragons. We know Cicero, which was a Roman statesman, talked about dragons and seeing dragons in Africa. We know the story about St. George and the dragon. I talked about the many Asian, Chinese stories about dragons. We know they have the year of the dragon, the zodiac, everything on that zodiac is real. There's a dragon on that zodiac. So it's so much. I don't want people to just discount the existence of dragons. They existed and they coexisted with us. And there's so many people that talked about that. So you have this, but then you have, as I've shown you the depictions, them being wiped out. It was a thing. It was something that was done that they came together and said, we got to wipe out all dragons. And they went out and they wiped them out and they covered up the whole thing. There was a time where people knew about dragons and talked about it. So when you think about the worst, beast on land and fly and killing livestock and so on and so forth, people had these problems. So it would make sense. As I said, Revelations wasn't added to the Bible to the 5th century. So it's talking about this dragon. So it would make sense to correlate that or to, parallel or make this comparison with dragons, us, When you think about the reptilian lower brain, which we have, you think about this connection with dragons, which is supposed to be a connection that black women have or black people have with dragons. The lower reptilian brain being Satan, representing the darkness, black people, blackness, dragons. Is so much. It fits. I'm not going to get into it too deep, but it fits. But the main point is they got wiped out. They got wiped out along with anything spiritual from the ancient world. So we look at this whole cover up, rid of the ancient world, get religion to be established as laws, and execute people who try to do anything from the ancient world. Alchemy, no. Witchcraft, no. Anything involving spiritual things was a no. This is the new spirituality. Get down with it. Plain and simple. Dragons was done away with. So we had that happen. So now let's go back again. You have this conquest, as I said, Kemet fell. And then you have the wars of the Diadochi. The wars of the Diadochi happened because, they was fighting over territory land. Who should rule what? Only the people at the highest point probably understood what was taking place. And everybody didn't understand what was the point of all this conquest, just to spread Hellenization. So they had civil war. So you had this happen. While this is going on, you have the Roman Empire rising. Plain and simple. They're growing up. And they're basically getting ready and poised to take over what the Greeks was doing. Now, again, this is history and what they give us. Some people tell you that the Greeks and the Romans was always in on it. And this whole war, we don't know if it really happened. But we know that ancient historians wrote about it. So I believe that Rome could have been a faction of people who, a civilization of people that grew up and separated from whoever was running everything and did their own thing and established what they established. It makes sense. And then once they came together, what happened? There wouldn't have been no war if they was together from the beginning. They would have just took over everything simultaneously. So I believe there was the Roman Empire and there was the Greek Empire. And then once Rome conquered Greece, we seen what happened. They came together. So we have this. And we look at the Roman Empire and then we see that, they didn't conquer deep into Europe. They didn't conquer deep into Africa. What was the holdup? You had the wars of the Diadochi. And then you had the Persians coming back and fighting with the Romans once the Romans conquered. And then you have the establishment of the Arab kingdom. The Arabs, they came to power and they fought against the Romans. And then eventually you have Islam coming into play. And then right around this time, we see them go into the rest of these European, countries. So look at the map here. Look at all these countries. A lot of people don't realize how many European countries it is. When people think of Europe, they think about Italy, they think about fucking England, Spain. They don't really think about how many other, European countries it is. So look at all these countries. This was all black lands, black territory, black people here. And then at this point, they begin to conquer into these European lands and then go no further into Africa, but they start going deeper into Europe and conquering these lands. So we have the conquest of these lands, right? And again, stick with me. This is going somewhere. I know the agenda. This is everything. So, stick with me on this. You have the conquest of these lands, right? We know them as European lands today. There's African territories, right? This is happening around the same time. It's a simultaneous thing. Fighting here in these lands. And you have the establishment of Christianity. So after they dominate and come into a land, they dominate, they bring their people in, set up civilizations based on Christian values. How do we know this? Go to these countries today. What is the religion? Christianity. And then you start seeing, what happened and what took place when you look at their history. It goes back to a certain point, and when you look at that point, it's the same time. It's the same time frame. 8th century, 7th century, right around the time all this stuff is going on. So when you look at Europe and you see, okay, we have these lands right here. England is not even incorporated yet. It will be a little bit later on. But those lands I showed you, those countries. So who was the, first European, major European ruler after Christianity, came into play? And a lot of people would say Constantine, but no, it was Charlemagne. Charlemagne was the biggest, European ruler during this time. And Charlemagne ruled so much. So it says here, Charlemagne, look at the time, look at the date, 742 to 814, right? So around this time, Christianity is growing. And so is Islam. Also known as Karl and Charles the Great, was a medieval emperor who ruled much of Western Europe from 768 to 814. In 771, Charlemagne became king of the Franks, a Germanic tribe in present-day Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Western Germany. He embarked on a mission to unite all Germanic peoples into one kingdom and convert its subjects to Christianity. A skilled military strategist, he spent much of his reign engaged in warfare in order to accomplish his goals. In 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Romans. In this role, he encouraged the Carolingian Renaissance, a cultural and intellectual revival in Europe. When he died in 814, Charlemagne's empire encompassed much of Western Europe, and he had also ensured the survival of Christianity in the West. Today, Charlemagne is referred to by some as the father of Europe. It says here, Charlemagne expands his kingdom. Once in power, Charlemagne sought to unite all Germanic people into one kingdom and convert its subjects into Christianity. In order to carry out this mission, he spent the majority of his reign engaged in military campaigns. Soon after becoming king, he conquered the Lombards in present-day northern Italy, the Avars in modern-day Austria and Hungary, and Bavaria, among others. Look at the lands I'm naming. This is all the places I just showed you. Charlemagne waged a bloody 3 decades-long series of battles against the Saxons, a Germanic tribe of pagan worshippers, and earned a reputation for ruthlessness. In 782, at the massacre of Verdun, Charlemagne reportedly ordered the slaughter of some 4,500 Saxons. He eventually forced the Saxons to convert to Christianity and declared that anyone who didn't get baptized or follow other Christian traditions be put to death. Now understand when it's saying tribes here, I want you to think about it for a second. Tribes. A tribe is somebody who is probably native to that land. And as I've shown you before, you're not going to find no bone in the lips white folks. We're talking about black people, tribes. But they wasn't going around slaughtering their own people and then repopulating with their own people. You know, it would be much easier for them to go into these civilizations and say, hey, this is what's going on. And we're your people. We're doing it for this reason. Why fight with us when you can join us? And we have so much already. Anglo-Saxons, Saxons, it's just a region that you can see on the map. It's different, that some parts was white, some parts was black. And once they came together to, differentiate the people, you have Saxons, you have Anglo-Saxons, and so many people are going to give you different interpretations of this to hide the fact that the indigenous people of England was black people. Germany as well.